10 o'clock, this is Sky News at 10, live from Jerusalem. Our top story, restraint or revenge? Israel is still deciding if it will directly strike Iran. Israeli military confirms that it's killed a senior Hezbollah commander in Lebanon as both Israel and Iran contemplate a direct confrontation.
We will respond in our time, in our place, in the way that we will choose.
If, for any reason, the Zionist regime makes the slightest malevolent move against our homeland, our individuals or our interests, it will definitely face a resolute and hard response.
Rishi Sunak tonight told his Israeli counterpart that this is a moment for calm heads to prevail as the Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron heads to the region. We'll bring you all the latest.
Also on Sky News at 10 tonight, victory for the woman described as the country's strictest head teacher as a court rules that a prayer ban at her North London school is lawful. Cancel culture or public safety? A Conservative conference headlined by Nigel Farage is shut down by Belgian police. Victory in sight for Rishi Sunak on his flagship Rwanda bill, but the Prime Minister faces a significant Tory backlash to his smoking ban proposals. A towering inferno fire engulfs one of Denmark's most historic buildings. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Good evening, live from Jerusalem. We begin tonight with Israel's dilemma, caution or retribution. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is taking his time despite calls from within Israel to hit Iran hard, and he's right to do so. He has a few options. All of them come at a price for his country and his people. His British counterpart and leaders from Washington to Moscow have counselled restraint and urged him to step away from the abyss. But after the phone calls and the public pleas, all they can do is nervously look on and wait. Here's our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn.
It is a sobering sight, part of an Iranian Emad missile. This is just its fuel tank. Range 1,000 miles, payload half a ton of explosives, accurate to within 10 metres. These ballistic missiles were fired by the dozen at Israel on Saturday, for which the Israeli military says there will be consequences.
Abril, when will you strike back? Firing 110 ballistic missiles directly to Israel will not get scot-free. We will respond in our time, in our place, in the way that we will choose.
But exactly what that means is not clear. The world awaits Israel's next move. Can it punish Iran for launching this barrage without plunging the region into a much bigger war?
Standing next to this gives a very powerful sense of the threat posed by Iran's missile onslaught on Saturday, but also the threat to the region should more of these missiles end up flying around if Israel's retaliation escalates the war into a much bigger conflict.
The risk of that happening is very real. In Tehran, Israel's enemies were warning again the smallest Israeli retaliation will be met with another show of force.
If, for any reason, the Zionist regime makes the slightest malevolent move against our homeland, our individuals or our interests, it will definitely face a resolute and hard response.
The fate of the region is for now in the hands of this one man, Benjamin Netanyahu. Meeting new recruits, Israel's Prime Minister was giving little away.
Iran stands behind Hamas, behind Hezbollah, behind others, but we're determined to win there and defend ourselves in all arenas.
There is jeopardy, but opportunity too for Israel, say observers, to build on the coalition of allies and neighbours that helped defend Israel that night.
You know, the real question is, what kind of response does the most harm to Iran and most benefits Israel? What does that mean? I think it probably means don't hit back at Iran, in Iran, right away, when there's a risk that you'll destroy the coalition arrayed against Iran and you won't be able to do much damage.
Instead of attacking Iran, Israel could do more of this, assassinating Iranian allies. Today it killed another Hezbollah commander in southern Lebanon. Israel was also drilling its forces south of the border, a fault line for any escalating conflict with Iran and its proxies. If it happens, a widening war would likely engulf the region, far beyond Israel's borders.
And Dominic joins me now. And Dominic, this really is a moment of real jeopardy. All options are on the table, and we're yet to hear from the Prime Minister and the War Cabinet.
We haven't heard from him since Saturday night, which I think is extraordinary. But, you know, he has a very difficult decision to make. I mean, one of the toughest decisions of his career, but probably one of the toughest decisions any Israeli leaders ever made. And what we've seen today and heard today, I think it gives a very clear sense of what he's wrestling with. On the one hand, I mean, that missile, we saw on the night, on the day after these pictures of very big black rockets in the Dead Sea and other parts of Israel. But, you know, as one of the Israeli spokesmen said today, when he saw them, he thought it was fake news. And he was told by another member of the military, yeah, that's a fake photograph. So when you see it, actually, you know, that missile is the length of a bus, and it had a warhead almost the size of a small car at the head of it, half a ton of explosive. You know, it makes you think that these arguments that it was a symbolic token attack, they seem fairly absurd when you stand next to that kind of missile. Any of those missiles, and about 100 of them, over 100, were fired at Israel. If they'd got through, hit a population centre, they would have done devastating damage, and we'd be talking about a very different situation today. We'd already be, I think, in an all-out regional war. So on the one hand, there are those people on the right of Israeli politics, but others as well, saying that has to be punished. There has to be a clear deterrence, a message of deterrence sent to Iran, so it never does that again. On the others, we've been hearing from people like David Horowitz, and he was talking about any number of former generals, Giora Eiland, you spoke to yesterday, former Mossad heads, all saying this is unprecedented what happened on Saturday for different reasons. America fought alongside Israel for the first time. This coalition of not just Western nations, but also Arab nations, they've been working together for a number of years now, putting together this kind of shield that would be planned for an event like this, and it worked. And if you strike Iran, particularly targets in Iran, you jeopardise all that. That coalition can't stay together. And keep your eyes on the main prize, which is defanging that nuclear threat from Iran. So it's a very tough decision. He is clearly taking his time to think about it. We're told from a number of sources that there's been an intense debate in Cabinet. Clearly, they haven't reached a decision yet as to when it's going to happen, but we have been told they know what they're going to do, and we're being told that it will be something that will not risk all-out war in the region. But one other thing is Herzi Halevi, the Chief of Staff at an airbase today, said that there will be a level of normality maintained till the end of Passover week. Now, that's the end of next week, so we may not see anything at least until then.
Dom, thank you, as always, for all of your analysis and bringing us up to date. Well, that's all from the team and I here in Jerusalem. I'll hand back to you, Anna, in London.
Yalda, thank you. A court has ruled that a prayer ban at a school in North London is lawful. A Muslim student who cannot be named claimed that the policy at the Michaela Community School was discriminatory. The school's head, Catherine Birbal-Singh, who is regularly described as the country's strictest head teacher, hailed the judgment as a victory for all schools. Sky Shaman Freeman-Powell has this report.
It's long been dubbed Britain's strictest school. Corridors are silent, pupils are supervised, and prayer rituals banned. Earlier this year, restriction of prayers became the subject of a High Court appeal, after a student argued that the school's stance amounted to discrimination. But now the High Court says that the school's rules are right, and there are many who agree.
Michaela School is a secular school. The people went into the school knowing that, and obviously the parents did. So then to kind of retroactively go and say that, you know, they wanted their sort of religious observance was obviously not right. So I think, irrespective of the faith, I think this was absolutely the right decision.
It's an argument backed by the judge in his written submissions and welcomed by the school's founder, Catherine Birbal-Singh, a former government czar turned Britain's strictest head teacher.
I think there's a line along the corridor.
Yeah.
If you drop your pencil, you get a detention.
Well, if you were to not bring your pen in, you would get a detention.
She's never afraid to court controversy, but this time it was the High Court that was on her side. In a statement, she said, "If parents do not like what Michaela is, they do not need to send their children to us," adding that the judgment was a victory for all schools. The pupil, though disappointed, remained considered, saying, "Even though I lost, I still feel I did the right thing in seeking to challenge the ban. I tried my best and was true to myself and by religion. Others question the ramifications and wonder how the school's decision may impact wider society.
I think school is where we teach children how to become adults. And if we're teaching them that at school you can't pray and it's wrong to pray, then you're creating adults who see specifically Muslimness as somehow wrong. And I think that's a really kind of problematic thing to be teaching.
The pupil will remain at Michaela to focus on her exams, whilst others will now study how the ruling will influence faith in British schools. Siobhan Freeman-Powell, Sky News.
Now, Nigel Farage has long railed against what he claims is a cancel culture against those who share his political beliefs. But today, the former Brexit Party leader saw a conference of European Conservatives that he was addressing in Brussels cancelled in a more literal way when the local police intervened to stop the event on what were called public safety grounds. Our political correspondent, Darren McCaffrey, was inside and sent this report.
Mr. Farage, what's happened? What's happened?
Forced out and not allowed back in. Nigel Farage and Conservative politicians from across Europe found themselves on the wrong side of the police in Brussels today.
Just doing my job, so...
Yeah. With the conference descending into chaos, the local mayor branded it an extremist event that was not welcome in the city.
Have you seen the people in the room? I mean, do this look like a bunch of yobs to you? Far, far from it. These are a lot of very respectable, very eminent people. I mean, we've got bishops here, we've got Prime Minister of a country here, we've got European royal family here. I mean, these are very respectable people. There's also no protest outside of any significance at all. It's about closing down an ideology.
And for a man making a speech about cancer culture, he seemed to be rather enjoying this moment. Are you prepared generally to be pulled off the stage?
I couldn't wait. I was ready for them. I was ready for them. Apparently they came in whilst I was on stage, saw the cameras and then withdrew. Pity.
Tensions did, however, rise as organisers scrambled to deal with what would be the third cancellation in as many days, with police insistent outside that everyone needed to go.
I told you earlier, the authorities have decided to shut off the event, and I'm here to signify the decision. So I have the papers here, and I'm here to enforce the decision.
Meanwhile, inside the venue, the conference limped on, with Suella Braverman's speech, meant to be a punchy attack on her old boss, the Prime Minister, completely overshadowed.
Just above your reaction to what's gone on here today.
It's a real shame that the thought police, instructed by the Mayor of Brussels, saw fit to try and undermine and denigrate what is free speech and free debate. I remember the words of Mrs. Thatcher, and I'm going to misquote her, but the more ridiculous and far-fetched and extremist their attempts are to silence us, the more cheered on I am, because it just shows that they've lost the political argument.
The Hungarian Prime Minister is due here tomorrow, but that is now in doubt, though organisers seem determined to push on.
I invite you to stay with us for as long as the festivities go on.
Today was just the latest skirmish in the constant battles around free speech. But the rather blunt use of the police, far from shutting these politicians up, seemed only to amplify their arguments. Darren McCaffrey, Sky News in Brussels.
The government's Rwanda bill has been amended once again by peers in the House of Lords this evening, but the flagship plan to tackle illegal migration could finally be on the brink of becoming law. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, joins me now from Downing Street. So is the end in sight for this, in Parliament at least, John, about to happen?
We are approaching the finale in this great drama, this great controversy that's gone on for months and months and months as the government has battled to get its Rwanda bill through Parliament. The House of Lords passed 4 amendments by opposition peers and crossbenchers. They had majorities of 25, 39, 17 and 57, so fairly healthy majorities. Some of them concentrating on this very controversial claim by the government that Rwanda is a safe country. And that last one with a majority of 57 was an amendment from Des Brown, the former Labour Defence Secretary, which calls for an exemption for agents, allies and employees of the UK overseas. So The final act, well, the bill comes back to the House of Commons. Round 3 of ping pong, it's been described. The government earlier this week had majorities around about the 70 mark, throwing out previous Lords' amendments. That's likely to be repeated when they start debating after Prime Minister's questions. Back to the Lords then. And at that point, we expect that the Lords will say, OK, enough. The elected government, the House of Commons, the elected House of Commons will have its way. And we expect the bill to finally get royal assent either later on Wednesday or possibly Thursday. After that, well, the first thing that's going to happen, the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office told MPs this week, is that Rwanda is going to get another cheque for £50 million. And also that the PM and James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, are going to set out the plan for those flights, quite probably with a news conference here in Downing Street on Thursday. Now, the government's not talking about flights in the spring anymore. They're talking about getting them airborne as soon as possible. June looks more realistic. There'll be huge relief here when that bill does get royal assent, which is what we're expecting later this week. But my word, the government's reputation's been badly damaged, and there are those even on the Conservative side who think, oh my goodness, why did we put so much store in this policy when it's so fraught with difficulty and problems?
John, in Downing Street, thank you. Well, the UK is a step closer tonight to creating a smoking-free generation. MPs have voted in favour of the government's plan to bring in some of the strictest smoking laws in the world. Well, the bill would mean anyone currently aged 15 or under would never be able to legally buy cigarettes. But nearly 60 Tory MPs voted against on a free vote, arguing that the plan is a breach of personal liberties.
We're seeing not just on tobacco, but also on sugar, also on alcohol, also on meat, a group of people who want to push an agenda which is about limiting people's personal freedom. And I think that is fundamentally wrong.
Heavy rains have hit the United Arab Emirates, flooding sections of major motorways and leaving vehicles abandoned on roadways across Dubai. Well, the storms also forced Dubai International Airport to close temporarily, and some carriers are suspending or diverting flights till tomorrow morning due to the bad weather. The famous 17th century twisted spire of dragons, one of Copenhagen's best-known landmarks, collapsed in flames today after a fire engulfed the city's old stock exchange. In scenes reminiscent of the Notre Dame fire in Paris, people rushed to save artefacts from the building before the 56-metre-high spire crashed down. It's been described as a disaster for Denmark. Our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, reports.
It had survived for 400 years, but today it fell. The spire of Copenhagen's iconic stock exchange engulfed in flames. More than 100 firefighters tried to battle the fire after it broke out on Tuesday morning, their job made harder by ongoing renovation, making parts of the building too dangerous to enter.
Now, the fire started in the middle of the building, which caused the fire to split the building in two halves. The half we're standing on right here is still out of control. The other half, they succeeded to find valuables such as paintings, old furniture, and try to get them out of the building.
This has shocked many in Copenhagen. The stock exchange was one of the oldest and most cherished landmarks. Seeing the blaze, stunned passers-by had to be stopped from getting too close in their efforts to help. Fire crews supported by the army, helping to keep people safe. Luckily, no one was trapped inside when this started. While parts of the building have been destroyed, people managed to save some of the priceless paintings being stored inside.
It's gruesome because the flames are the worst. You can restore a lot of water damage, but the flames take everything. It'll be interesting to see how bad it is. You can rebuild architecture, but paintings, interiors, books, archives, that's difficult.
This fire has been described as a national disaster. Why or how it started is still being investigated. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News.
It's the economy, stupid, the mantra that has held true in US elections in recent history. So, news today from the IMF that the United States economy is to grow at double the rate of the other countries in the G7 this year would normally bode well for a sitting president facing re-election. But despite that relatively strong performance, President Biden is still struggling with low approval ratings on the economy. Our economics editor, Ed Conway, has been to the key state of Pennsylvania to find out why.
This is the town that helped give birth to modern America. The steel from the Bethlehem plant went into the Empire State Building and the Golden Gate Bridge. But now this part of Pennsylvania is at the heart of something else, a political battleground.
We're a swing area in a swing state.
The White House is throwing billions of dollars at silicon chip and green tech manufacturers. But the verdict from here is it's not taking hold yet.
We're encouraged to see that our state and our federal government is taking an interest in economic development
But is it having
policy,
an impact?
but it's not yet having an impact.
Donald Trump was here on Saturday, and today Joe Biden paid a visit to his hometown of Scranton. They both believe this state and the economy could decide the election.
It's a stark contrast from my opponent. He looks at the economy from Mar-a-Lago, where he and his rich friends embraced the failed trickle-down policies that have failed working families for more than 40 years. Scranton values are Mar-a-Lago values. These are the competing visions for our economy.
For some businesses, that government money is beginning to trickle down. This architectural firm has never been busier.
Without that government help, this project would be sitting exactly where it sat 20 years ago.
But in this country of divides, there's a new chasm opening up between what the economists are saying and what people are experiencing.
According to the International Monetary Fund's latest figures, no other economy in the G7 is going to grow as fast as the US this year. No other country in the world has outperformed expectations as much as this place. And yet there's a massive gulf between what economists say people ought to be feeling about the economy and what they're actually feeling. And that's ominous for Joe Biden.
Here we go.
Indeed, the president's approval ratings are worse than nearly every one of his predecessors. Why? Part of the answer might be found at this nearby food bank.
It's really the cost of living here that is so struggling, is really challenging people. People who have lived in a home for 4 or 6 years are now can't stay there anymore because their rent skyrocketed.
I go to the grocery store and then I get a couple things and it's like almost 100 and something. So it's very expensive.
So you've noticed it's really expensive, have you?
Yes.
And does it feel like it's getting better or like it's getting worse?
Not really. It's getting worse.
Analysts say while America may not be in recession, it's feeling something else. A vibe session. Bad vibes about inflation, about the standard of living. Vibes that some think could decide this year's election. Ed Conway, Sky News in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Shared ownership schemes are designed to help first-time buyers get on the housing ladder. But for many, instead of being a financial help, they've become a burden. Scores of part owners who've used the government-backed initiative have seen their monthly service charges rise to unimaginable and unaffordable amounts. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this report.
This is Josie Dom's dream home in Colchester, complete with cat outside. She's a single mother and bought it, or part of it, through the government's shared ownership scheme last year. But as a part owner, she still pays service charges to the leaseholder for things like maintenance and repairs to communal services. She was unprepared for just how much, though.
It's a 138% increase, which is just madness.
The charges included some for non-existent services like CCTV and a communal boiler. Josie hasn't paid the bill and is now in arrears.
The idea of shared ownership is to help people like myself and others that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford their own home, and then suddenly, again, we can't afford it, which makes a mockery of being shared ownership, doesn't it, and having social housing.
The difficulty is that shared owners are still tenants, and across the country they face charges out of their control. That's an issue across the whole leasehold system, but it can put more financial strain on shared owners who own less than other buyers. We've spoken to dozens of people in the same situation. They saw shared ownership as an opportunity, but then those service charges increased, other charges increased massively, and that opportunity becomes a trap. Data shared exclusively with Sky News shows that the number of people seeking legal advice about the reasonableness of service charges has nearly doubled since 2021. That's across all types of leasehold. But the nature of the affordable homes being built has changed. Fewer council homes for social rent have been built recently. Instead, under the Conservatives, shared ownership, here in orange, has taken up a much larger proportion of the affordable homes being built.
Given that shared ownership is an affordable product, we need to make sure that service charges are affordable, and people, if they find that the product is not affordable, that they can sell it and find something that is more affordable. I think this is very important.
For more than a month, Josie's housing association, Peabody, did not respond to her attempts to contact them for an explanation. However, when Sky News got in touch, they said they'd made a mistake, telling us, "It's important to us that service charges are accurate and reasonable. This was an error and we're really sorry. No one has been overcharged and we've written to those affected." That will be welcome news when it finally comes for Josie. But the initial mistaken increase in her service charges shows how precarious shared ownership can be. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Colchester.
Out of control, the view from campaigners after it was revealed that people in the UK are throwing away an estimated 1.7 billion pieces of plastic every week. Greenpeace are calling on the government to commit to a legally binding target to reduce plastic production by at least 75% by 2040 to help combat the problem. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has more.
The contents of 2 million Londoners' recycling bins ends up at this waste facility in Southwark. A lot of it's plastic, but perhaps more than you'd think. Campaign group Greenpeace asked volunteers to count the plastic going into their bins. It found an estimated 1.7 billion pieces get chucked each week, equating to 90 billion pieces a year. According to the recyclers, consumers aren't the problem. Regulations and taxes on plastic producers need to be tougher.
I don't think today people are the blockers. Really what we need today is from the government, strong signal, strong incentives on the industry, the brands, the producers, the waste management industry to really invest and do that, deliver that.
Facilities like this end up having to sort out all our plastic waste. And they're very good at recycling things like hard plastic into milk bottles, drinks bottles. But when it comes to film plastic, plastic bags, crisp packets and the like, all of that has to be sent for incineration. Burning plastic waste has a carbon footprint similar to burning coal. No wonder Greenpeace wants plastics to pretty much disappear.
At the moment, we're in the middle of really crucial negotiations for a UN global plastics treaty. And we're asking the UK government to show huge ambition, be a leader in ambition in securing a treaty which will deliver a target for cutting plastic production.
But binning plastic altogether could have unintended environmental consequences, according to new research. Switching from a plastic carrier bag to a paper bag leads to an 80% increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions for pet food in a tin are around 70% higher than if it's in a plastic pouch. And an aluminium can of drink has a carbon footprint 50% higher than a plastic drinks bottle. This doesn't, of course, include the impact of plastics on the marine environment or microplastics on human health, but hints at a future for the right kind of plastic. Making all the packaging we throw away recyclable, better still, biodegradable, not made from fossil fuels. Innovations to replace the miracle material of the 20th century with one fit for the future. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the journalist and author Rachel Shabi. Welcome to both of you. And among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Eye, its headline, Sunak gives Netanyahu a warning from world leaders. That and plenty more, of course, when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories this evening. Israel's war cabinet has met again to consider retaliatory action against Iran. Rishi Sunak has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu tonight to urge restraint. A court has ruled that a prayer ban at a North London school is lawful after a Muslim student claimed the policy at the Michaela Community School was discriminatory. And Nigel Farage has hit out at what he called cancel culture after authorities in Brussels tried to shut down a Conservative conference while the former UKIP leader was speaking. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the journalist and author, Rachel Shabi. Welcome to both of you. So to the front pages, as ever, let's kick off then, shall we, tonight with the Eye. It leads with Rishi Sunak's call with Benjamin Netanyahu and a warning to the Israeli Prime Minister, keep a calm head in the face of further conflict with Iran. The Metro reports on the High Court rejecting a claim by a Muslim pupil that her rights were infringed because she wasn't allowed to pray while at school. That is also on the front page of The Express, the head teacher welcoming the High Court's decision as a victory for all schools. And the Daily Mail as well, the headline, victory for the bravest head teacher in Britain. The Guardian leading with tonight's vote in the House of Commons. Tory divisions exposed as Sunak's smoking ban moves a step closer, their headline. The Financial Times quotes the head of the US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, suggesting it will take longer than expected for American inflation to drop to their target of 2%. And the Daily Star reports on Liz Truss describing their infamous lettuce as part of an evil London elite. Don't forget to scan the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme. You can check out those front pages for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head to Henry Hill and Rachel Shabi. Starting with the Eye, in fact, this phone conversation between Rishi Sunak giving Netanyahu a warning and the phraseology he used that significant retaliation will only deepen insecurity in the Middle East. Rachel.
He's right, and many other European and also the US leadership has been trying to convince Netanyahu that this is not the way to go, that they do not want to see a significant retaliation for Iran's strike on Saturday, which in turn was a retaliation for the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Syria on April 1st. I think this assumes that Netanyahu is a rational player, and the reality is that Netanyahu has his own calculations. First of all, he's got a very right-wing, hardline coalition government that's keeping him in power, and that is totally gung-ho about just about everything, including Palestinians, including Gaza, including Iran. These are the kind of people who want to annex Gaza and the West Bank and see the Gaza war, which has already killed 30,000 people, mostly civilians, as not brutal enough. So that's who he's in coalition with. Also, he's facing mounting disapproval from his own country, from left to right. People now disapprove of him, but they can't get rid of him. And he's lost his MO, which is he's supposed to be Mr. Security. Both October 7 and this Iran strike happened on his watch. And the reality is that for Netanyahu, this is a way of staying in power. What's happened over the last few days is that he's rallied the international coalition to his side, whereas before the provocation on April 1st of the bombing of that Iranian consulate, which Iran would have to respond to, before that, all our eyes were on Gaza. Who's talking about Gaza now? 11 schoolchildren died today by an Israeli drone. What did they do? How are they a threat?
I suppose the point that Israel makes is it doesn't start on April the 1st and that consulate building, although one Israeli said actually it was the building next door to the consulate building, actually. It's the fact that actually Iran has supported proxies, whether they be in Yemen or they're Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, or they are actually Hamas itself that committed those atrocities on October the 7th. Certainly we heard from Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari today saying firing 110 ballistic missiles directly at Israel will not get off scot-free. And that's the difficulty, this direct threat from Iran, which we've not seen.
Yeah, although they did telegraph it several days in advance, so you sort of get the impression that Iran wasn't massively keen on many of those missiles getting through, right? They let everyone get ready to knock them all out of the sky, but they get all the credit for sending them. I think Israel has a legitimate interest in trying to contain Iran's proxies, right? Like, many of those are murderous militias. But a direct strike on Iran doesn't even seem to be in Israel's interests, right? Because it is just going to further escalate a conflict. It's going to potentially get things to the point where the international community, meaning America, would have to intervene, and there's no guarantee, certainly once Trump comes in, that that would actually happen to support it. And Israel had actually been making progress. I think one of the interesting things that leapt out to me about the aftermath of this missile attack was you had Saudi Arabia just openly saying, yeah, Iran keeps doing this to try and ruin the sort of normalization of relations between the kingdom and Israel. So Israel has opportunities still to try and win allies, take targeted action against Iran's network, and improve its own security. But some kind of sort of ego tit for tat, where it's like, well, they launched a load of missiles at us, and so now we need to send something equally spectacular back. That is just the kind of sort of absurd chain of events that, historically speaking, leads to terrible wars.
Yes, and certainly there are many reports of cabinet splits in the Israeli war cabinet, and there are other cabinets that they're operating as well. The Guardian says they've got an exclusive. This is their diplomatic editor, Patrick Wintour. Benjamin Netanyahu is seeking to trap the West into a total war across the Middle East that would have incalculable consequences for the region and the world, quoting Iran's most senior diplomat in the UK. So the strategy of this and the implications of this are far-reaching.
Well, that's what I was talking about before, about Netanyahu having his own calculation here, and it is not the same as Britain's calculation. It's not the same as America's calculation. Netanyahu is very good at staying in power no matter what, because if he knows the minute he is removed from power, he's facing a trial, he's facing court, he's facing imprisonment, potentially. So his calculation is basically, how do I keep this dragging on for as long as possible? He knows he's got opposition on the streets. He knows people want to boot him out. And he knows that he also needs to keep his right-wing coalition happy in order to stay in power. So that's what I was talking about before, about him having a very different calculation. The trouble for him is that what Iran has shown is that Israel's policy of deterrence, of we will repel any kind of disgruntlement from our borders, from our neighbours, by being super aggressive, by preemptively being the aggressor in the region, so it will show them not to dare to attack. That's a busted flush. Obviously, October 7 busted it. It's the north of the country is completely evacuated because of the strikes from Hezbollah. Meanwhile, you've got Iran with this unprecedented airstrike on Saturday. Israel now has to reconcile with the idea that the only path is a political solution, is a political process that gives Palestinians, finally, their rights and their freedoms, because deterrence is clearly no longer viable.
Well, we're so far from that path, we're not. I just want to show people the Financial Times as well. A ballistic missile lying on the shores of the Dead Sea, pulled out, if you remember the pictures that we certainly saw on social media, after Israel and a coalition of partners intercepted 99% of projectiles and drones launched by Iran towards Israel last week. The question is, would that coalition be there? Should there be another retaliation by Iran if Israel acts? That's the question, I suppose, for many.
Well, I genuinely at the moment can't foresee circumstances where Western countries allowed a massive ballistic missile strike to hit Israel. The question, I think, becomes if it got to the point where you had needed boots on the ground for whatever reason, because ultimately Israel is picking a lot of fights. I disagree slightly. I think October 7th was not Israel was aggressed against. It's been aggressed against many times throughout its history in the region. But it does have to be careful, because America is the only country that can really ever back any of this up, right? No matter what European politicians, but when they like to talk big about defence, it's always America that ultimately has to do this. America might be just about to re-elect Donald Trump. Donald Trump's shown absolutely no interest in spending American blood and treasure overseas. So it could be the case that in a few months' time, in a couple of years' time, Israel's strategic situation, which has always been that it had the United States in its back pocket, changes quite substantially. And at that point, you really do want to have a way to walk back your position because you do not want to be in a kind of six-day war situation again.
Can I just point out, because it's important, I'm not saying Israel obviously was massively aggressed against on October 7. That was a horrifying attack. I'm saying that there are root causes that consistently Israel hasn't addressed. For the past 20-plus years,
Rachel, we have discussed
the peace
that a lot
process has been
since
off the
October.
table, and that has had consequences.
OK, apologies for interrupting you. You've got two big stories to do domestically, certainly. One is the smoking ban, lead story certainly for The Guardian and other newspapers as well. The start of this process, I'm going to go to you first, if you don't mind, because I know you've been talking about it already tonight, and you are somewhat anti it, right?
I mean, yeah. So there's all kinds of principled arguments for or against this policy, but just...
The policy is to stop the start, is that's what they say?
Essentially, the policy is that they bring in a smoking ban that raises, whereby you ban the sale of cigarettes to people and the age goes up every year. So after a certain cut-off date, I think it's born in 2009.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
There we go. You can't buy cigarettes ever. And it's an atrociously designed policy. The New Zealand policy, which it was copying and which everyone keeps saying, oh, they're doing the New Zealand policy. The New Zealand policy did have this ban, but it also was going to ban the independent resale of tobacco, so set up a national monopoly, so to control the trade. And New Zealand is a long way from anywhere, so it's incredibly hard to smuggle stuff in to New Zealand. None of this is true of the United Kingdom. So all this is it's going to bring in this ban, and then it's going to leave it to trading standards, poor overstretched trading standards, to try and enforce it. And thousands, maybe tens of thousands of small shops, corner shops rely on tobacco revenue, and they can't afford to stop selling it. And so actually what will happen over the next few years if this policy goes ahead is you will have occasional, essentially arbitrary punishment beatings of independent retailers by trading standards when they catch them. And this country will just get flooded with even more illegal tobacco. 1 in 5 cigarette sales is already illegal. I think the interception rate in British ports of smuggled containers is 1 container in 10.
But 1 in 4 of all cancers has a smoking cause. 80,000 deaths a year. 1 hospital admission, roughly a minute in England, has smoking-related causes. So what do you do if you do not do this?
According to nearly every major international study, including the Khan Review, which was the government's own review from 2 years ago, based on where we are at the moment with our current policy mix prior to this, smoking is going to taper off at about 2% prevalence by 2050. That means
younger people are picking it up. That's the problem,
fewer people than ever are picking it up. There are still some, in the same way that there are still users of every drug that we've banned, right? You've still got coke users, MD users, all of that. But smoking, we're genuinely winning, right? Nearly every study, except the one the government cooked up.
And the cost to the NHS of, what, roughly £20 million a year?
The point is, and I think this is part of the problem with tobacco policy, is that we're not debating, or we shouldn't be debating, the principle. If Rishi Sunak was actually going to stamp out smoking with a very effective policy, this would be a very different discussion. But it's a really bad policy that is getting a hospital pass because people think the goal is good.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about this, or can I move on to the next one? Do you want to move on?
I actually agree with that. I think it's the wrong way to go about the right goal. So.
OK, interesting. Let's go to the Metro. Strict heads, prayer time win. Where do you stand on this one? You know, her push that this is a secular school and therefore needs to be seen to be a secular school effectively, Rachel.
I mean, I don't understand this at all. I don't understand why she's so militant about it. This head teacher from this school that has a reputation, that she has a reputation for being the strictest. I don't understand why she needs to ban prayer. Why is it so threatening? Why does she need to prohibit the practice that can be quite effectively facilitated in, say, a prayer room that could be open for all kinds of different faiths and all kinds of different prayers? It makes no sense to me on the terms in which it is presented.
But it seemed to be being divisive within the school, is the point.
Divisive how?
Well, I mean, we don't...
Seriously, divisive how?
Well, I heard that it led to death threats, in fact.
That's not...
There were very large groups.
OK, but divisive in the school how? Were school children saying, we are divided, we are rowing over this?
But apparently that was the case. Yeah, apparently it was causing groups and cliques in the school.
Lots of things cause groups and cliques in schools. Yeah, that's not per se a problem.
No, but well, clearly she thought it was.
She thought it was.
Right, OK, fine, but neither of us were at the school. But
no, but I'm just saying that we can invent... I think this is a moral panic.
I don't think, no.
I think this is a moral panic.
Well, I think she's no better than either of us, and she is the headmistress.
Why should she know better than either of us? She's a militant secularist with very strong opinions.
Because she's on the ground in the school, and it's the school with some of the best results in the country. Personally, it wouldn't be my approach to how you run a school, but I think that part of the point of having free schools and the academy system is that you allow a diverse range of institutions which then are allowed to enforce their own views. Now, she has a very French approach towards religion. It's not necessarily mine, but I think she has the right to uphold that in her school, as long as it is applied equally to people of all faiths.
OK, we're running over. Rachel, we will talk again about that, I'm sure. Lots more still to come in the next part of our programme. Could Rishi Sunak bypass Parliament and order the RAF to start deportation flights to Rwanda? More on that in just a moment.
Obviously, any parent who's got the means to do so is going to look to help younger members of their family, especially in the current situation where a lot of younger people are struggling to get on the housing ladder. I think about half of baby boomers were able to own their own house by the time they were 30. Now, for millennials, it's under 30%. So you can understand in individual situations why people do that. But when you sort of step back and you apply that society-wide, it's not a very healthy situation where you have a great swathe of the population only able to get on in life if they get a handout from their parents. More to the point, before their parents are dying. You know, once upon a time you might expect to get an inheritance, but now it's having to happen a lot earlier. And that's not just for obviously getting on the housing ladder. With that comes the issue of having children. So we find ourselves in a very unhealthy situation where you're having to try to perpetuate the next generation by giving away as much of your money as you can now. It's not the easiest way of doing it, especially given that in this country a lot of finance is wrapped up in assets, it's wrapped up in wealth, it's wrapped up in your own home. And of course, that's even before we take into account the fact that things like social care, as you get older, is getting a lot more expensive, and a lot more people are needing social care because things like dementia are becoming a lot more prevalent. I don't think you can sort of sit there and say to an individual, no, you shouldn't give your child, you know, your 30-year-old son or daughter money, that's a bad thing. But when you take it in the round as a society-wide issue, I think it's a rather unhealthy situation.
I don't think it's particularly unhealthy, and I also don't think there's a lot of shame associated with this. I've been seeing a lot of headlines and people have been admitting to feeling embarrassed or mortified about seeking money from parents. But actually, if you look at the stats, over the last 50 years, there's been a 158% increase on UK average house prices. Look at London. The average house price in London is £730,000. People can't get a house nowadays. So going to your mum and dad's, instead of seeking cheap liquidity options, I don't think is at all embarrassing. There's no shame, and I definitely don't think it's unhealthy.
People are working, they leave school, leave university, and they enter the job market at the same time. Two different people. One is going to get on the housing ladder, one is going to be able to have children, one is going to be able to do lots of things because their parents can give them money, and the other one can't. And it doesn't matter how much work that person puts in necessarily. They know that whatever they do, they're at a disadvantage behind this other person simply because this other person's parents bought a house or saved properly at a different time. That doesn't incentivise people to push on. It doesn't incentivise a particularly competitive workplace. And I think it actually sets in a degree of, you don't want to say resentment, but almost sort of resigned to your fate.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Henry Hill and Rachel Shabi. Welcome back to both of you. Henry, are we in the end game for the Rwanda bill making its way through Parliament then?
In that sense, yes. In that very specific sense, it does look like the government's going to get the law through. And then it gets to move on to the vast array of technical questions about trying to get these flights off the ground, which is what this story is about. Basically, for several months, the government has been trying to find a carrier to take the contract for flying people to Rwanda. And shockingly, most of these airlines, which are customer-facing businesses, have said no. And as a result, they have ended up asking a non-commercial business, which does special contracts for the RAF, There's apparently there's a clause in its contract which allows the RAF to use some of its planes for special missions, and one of those is going to be...
I think ask is exaggerating.
Ask,
It's
yes.
doing a bit of heavy lifting there,
yes,
isn't
precisely,
it?
yes. Basically,
the government will activate a clause in a contract.
There's a clause in the contract that allows them to use these companies' planes for certain additional duties, and one of them is now going to be, in theory, assuming it ever gets through the courts, flying people to Rwanda. It's actually slightly remarkable that they didn't go for this at the beginning, because they were never going to get a commercial airline to do it, and all that's done is produced months of intermittent headlines about another person saying no. They could have just done this at the start, but that's where we've ended up.
Yeah, fascinating. Anyway, so the House of Lords, once again, putting the spanners in the works. It'll all get undone in the Commons tomorrow, possibly even a news conference later this week about how it will all operate. I mean, just a very quick thought on this, Rachel.
It's a horrible policy. It's unworkable. The Lords, far from putting a spanner in the works, were trying to prevent breach of human rights law, but OK, phrase it like that if you want to. But also,
I had 20 seconds.
But also, it's no wonder that they're trying to find these ways because as you say, there's no airline that will want to do this because of the huge pressure and the petitions and the campaigning to try and stop this on the basis of basic human rights, which the government is determined to violate.
Let's talk about Liz Truss's The Lettuce, shall we, and move on. Lettuce Liz, plucky Daily Star lettuce, is part of the evil London elite. She's certainly railing against a lot of things. And also in her book, fascinatingly so, the Metro tells us, that she talked about sharing the Foreign Secretary's residence at Chevening in Kent with Dominic Raab. It was like an exalted student Flatcher. I'd arrive and find protein shakes labelled Raab in the fridge. It probably wasn't necessary, she said. But anyway, some amusing details in the book she's obviously selling.
Yeah. It probably might end up being the best thing to come out of her premiership. Who knows? I think this, though, is just absolutely a prime example of why she was bad at politics. If something like this happens and you're a politician, you do one of two things. You either laugh along with it and take nearly all of the heat out, or you just don't mention it at all. You don't do this, because now it's back on the front pages. This is mad.
Yes, we need Lettuce Cam again, don't we? Rachel, Henry, thank you both very much indeed. We'll see more, obviously, of you in the 11. Right now, here's the weather. Well, a brisk northerly wind will bring further showers, but it's looking more settled for the weekend. Most inland areas will start Wednesday dry and chilly with a patchy frost, but there will be a few showers around. They'll mostly affect areas exposed to the brisk northerly wind, but coastal gales in the northeast will ease. Britain will stay mainly fine during the morning, but cloud will build to bring further locally heavy showers, mainly in the east. Meanwhile, Ireland and Northern Ireland will turn rather grey, with patchy rain spreading from the northwest. Chilly everywhere and breezy, especially for Britain's east coast. Wales and southwest England will turn rather dull and damp during the afternoon, while Ireland and Northern Ireland will brighten from the west. Elsewhere, showers will tend to die out in the north. Thursday, fine and calm for southern Britain.